Okay. Before I start, I had a person who takes my class for a long time now, who has been to the St. Catherine Monastery. Just discovered that the lady at the front row there was in St. Catherine Monastery too. And so I had invited Dede Johnson to come and talk to us a little bit about, the feeling for it, because it's a good thing to show it on the screen, but it's such a special place that it's always interesting to hear how you feel. Also, she's an icon painter and has taken lots of classes. And so as she's in Canada right now and watching us, by the way, she is going to come next week in the afternoon. We have the class on the Morgan Beatus, that incredible 10th century monastery manuscript. And she's going to be attending that, and will bring some of her icons at the same time, so you'll be able to admire them. So thank you, Dede, for that offer. So today I'm going to talk about a very special place where I say right away, I haven't been, but I've been aware of this place for a long time. And it's so special in so many ways. It's the oldest continuously lived in monastery in the world. It was one of the 5 monasteries that were built between 300 and 550 of our era. The others either don't exist at all anymore, or have been vacated, or have been vacated temporarily and are now again, but this is the one that has been continuously inhabited. To give you an idea where it is, it's at the very tip of the Sinai Peninsula. So you see Cairo is here, Alexandria is there, you see Israel and Jerusalem. And here it's really at the tip of the Sinai Peninsula. It's about 23,000 square mile mass, the Sinai Peninsula, that forms the northeastern part of Egypt. It has been under the control of various empires and nations throughout history, including the Roman, the Byzantine, the Ottoman, and Egyptian empires, as well as being occupied by Israel from 67 to 82. Here is a more telling, I think, map, because it's a physical, and so you can see where it is. Just another map to show you the distance between Constantinople, where the order came to build it, and the monastery of St. Catherine. It was built by the order of the Byzantine Emperor Justinian, and it was built between 548 and 562. St. Helen, mother of Constantine, had requested before that a chapel to be built on the foot of the Mount Sinai, where the burning bush was believed to grow. St. Helen, or Helen, the mother of Constantine, was very instrumental in pinpointing the sacred place in the Near East, in Palestine, and where Christ had been crucified, and where John the Baptist had baptized Christ, and so on, and where the crosses were. She's the one that showed the place where the 3 crosses had been buried. And so I don't know, she didn't go to the Sinai, but had heard of it and said, okay, we need to build something just to show the place. So here is the place. And you see that small monastery compound at the foot of Mount Sinai, with a little village that is a little further. There is, of course, no electricity there. There is just, the people live from what is produced there. And what they're able, the sea is not that far, so I assume they can get fish too. but it's a very self-contained space. And here you have it. So I take advantage of this to show you this used to be the only way to get in. So you had to put in the basket the letter that showed that you had the permission to visit the monastery, and they would look at that and say, okay, we bring down a bigger basket, and you jumped in the basket and they lift you up to the penthouse. By now they have 2 new doors where you can more conveniently enter the place. Just, and we'll talk about it a little later, but on April 18, 2017, an attack by the Islamic State in the Sinai province tried to invade the monastery, take it over at a checkpoint near the monastery, and that killed 1 policeman and injured 3 police officers, but they didn't succeed. And it will have some consequences that we'll talk about at the end of the presentation. Here's another picture that shows you the Mount Sinai behind it. And we have to realize how sacred that place was. It was sacred to the Jews. For in the Torah, there's so much talked about the Sinai, and then Moses being, coming first to Mount Horeb after killing an Egyptian, and then he stayed a little bit there. Then God told him to go back and liberate his people. And so he came back and then stayed there. And then you have the whole series. You have the burning bush there. You have the 10 commandments there. You have a whole series of very pivotal places for both the Jews, the Christians, and then later on the Muslim, the 3 religions of the book of the Bible. So just a few words about the monastery. It was built by the order of Justinian between 548 and 562. It's the world's oldest continuously inhabited Christian monastery. It was first dedicated to Mary, and we'll see how she relates to the burning bush. It was eventually renamed after the said Catherine of Alexandria's body had been found in the area and was taken to the monastery. And the relic of the saint turned it into an important Christian pilgrimage on the way to Jerusalem. So they would just go through there. Saint Catherine at that time was a very important saint. She really represented women and the courage of her facing death and so on. So it was very important. It is of the Byzantine Rite and dependent on the Patriarchate of Jerusalem. In 630s, Sinai was conquered by the Arab armies of Amr ibn al-As. In the 8th century, thanks to its isolation and prestige, the monastery escaped the iconoclastic period of, it's missing something, of what was happening in Constantinople and in the Byzantine Empire, where they, at 2 different periods, decide they refuse any images, as it is said in the 10 Commandments, you don't reproduce, etc., and decide to erase all these images, destroyed icons, and whitewashed all the mosaics and paintings that had been done representing people. But because of the fact that they were under Arab ruling at that time, and the fact they were so isolated, they completely escaped from that, which explains why they have the oldest icons that are in existence because of that thing. So they also were protected during the Crusades. They were not looted because, again, of the remote location. In 1592, it was restored thanks to a donation of Prince Alexander III of Moldavia-Valachie. And in 1799, during the Egyptian campaign, General Bonaparte ordered the restoration of the northern wall of the monastery. Since the 20th century and going on with the 21st, there is a steady decline particularly since the jihadist attack in 2017. People are concerned to go there. This is to illustrate, it has nothing to do with the monastery, but it's an illustration by the Limbourg brothers, part of the Belles Heures of the Duc de Berry. And it shows St. Catherine's body being transported close to the Sinai. You can see the mountain. She was the daughter of the governor of Alexandria during the reign of the Emperor Maximian. She was of Greek origin, and from a young age, she devoted herself to study. Then she had a vision of the Virgin Mary and the child Jesus and persuaded her to become a Christian. And then you had the persecution under Emperor Maxentius. And she went to the emperor and rebuked him for his cruelty. He summoned 50 of the best pagan philosophers and orators to dispute with her, hoping that they would refute her pro-Christian arguments, but Catherine won the debate. Yeah. Several of her adversaries, conquered by her eloquence, declared themselves Christian. And then the emperor gave order to subject Catherine to terrible tortures and then throw her in prison. The legend says that during her confinement, she was fed daily by a dove from heaven and also was visited by Christ that encouraged her to just go on her fight. During her imprisonment, more than 200 people came to see her, including Maxentius' wife, Valeria Maximilia. They all converted to Christianity. But because she refused to marry the emperor who proposed her at that time, the emperor condemned Catherine to death on a spiked wheel. And that's what that symbol that always accompanies her when you see Saint Catherine of Alexandria, you have a broken spike wheel. Because when they tried to put her on the wheel broke. And so she couldn't be killed on that thing. But then she was beheaded and that didn't break. And so she was then buried. But all the courage and the whole legend around her made her a very famous saint. I want to address also the question of monasticism, because it's something that for a long time I always question, why are these people going through such very ascetic life, and particularly in a place like that, so remote. But we have to keep in mind that at the beginning of Christianity, you had few Christians for a lot of people that were not. And the way of life was not always easy for the Christians to be among, if you want, among these people. And so they tried to escape these unsanitary conditions, if you can call it that way, and move out. They tried very often to follow the example of Elijah, of St. John the Baptist, and of Christ, and go in the desert. This was not an easy life, and many had to quit because it was so difficult. And so little by little, many of them just decided maybe they lived close to each other, these hermits, that they could help each other in case of difficulty. And from their progression, some went through a monastery. So let's look at that. First of all, the monasticism is a religious way of life focused on renouncing worldly pursuits to pursue spiritual ends, mostly through celibacy, vows of poverty and obedience, and by withdrawing from society to live in seclusion or in spiritual community. That's the definition. But you have two different forms of life. The eremitical or hermitical, living in isolation as a recluse, often in desert or remote area, or cenobitical, which is communal, living in a community, probably a monastery, with other monastics who share the same goals and life according to a rule. And we're talking very early here with St. Catherine. Of course, by the end of the first millennium and the beginning of the next one, we'll see all different orders, the Benedictines, the Franciscan, the Dominicans, and so on, that are going to establish convent, but at that time, a very different, much more organized fashion. So the concept, as I mentioned, was drew inspiration from Elijah, John the Baptist, and Jesus. As well as, and we cannot forget that, but as well as Eastern philosophical and religious traditions emphasizing discipline and self-renunciation. And when I talk about that, the Buddhism had monks and had these gathering of hermits for a long time. You have all these caves in China and in India, where you find that the Buddhists and some Hindus had the same thing. So you have an influence. We cannot think that Christianity is remote from this. The Buddhists came 500 years before Christ and really permeated a lot of the philosophies of Christians. So the monastic life took root as a definite institution in 4th century Egypt, and through St. Anthony the Great, who was known for pioneering asceticism in the desert, leading to a solitary life and inspiring others. And then St. Pachomius, who I was, by the way, not familiar with, founded the first communal monasteries in Tabenisi, establishing a system of rules of collective living in contrast with the solitary eremitic life. The St. Catherine Monastery by now has about 36 monks. And by the way, they come from all over the world. They're not particularly Egyptian or from the Middle East, but there are American monks among them. The figure include those living in annexes elsewhere, which means Cairo and Suez in Egypt. And then you have the laity of the Church of Sinai, with some Christian Arabs employed by the monasteries and fishermen on the Red Sea coast. Just a little map to give you from the top an idea. This is a series of summits all around, and it has been a lot of disagreement where the Sinai was, and they still don't agree exactly where the Sinai was. There are two possibilities. Circle in red the St. Catherine Monastery there in the very center, but some think that in fact Sinai could be this place. The Bedouins have that in their tradition, but most archaeologists locate it just behind the St. Catherine Monastery. And here's a view of the Mount Sinai with on the very top, you can see a small building, and there actually are two of them. It's 7,497 feet high. And so you see at the very top, they build a small chapel and a mosque. And the chapel is closed. It is supposed to contain what was left of the rock from which the tables were written on. The mosque is open, but not really inhabited. Here's the mosque. And here's the little chapel. It takes about 2.5 hours to climb up. And you can do it with a camel if you want to take it all the way. Interesting that when we go back to the 16th century, we find El Greco that was born in Crete, that in one of his early works is representing the Mount Sinai. In the back of this beautiful triptych, the Modena triptych, and if you see it, so you turn it around, and there is the Mount Sinai with the monastery at the bottom. So he had heard, this is a word of mouth. We don't have any proof that El Greco was ever there, but it was important enough that he would use it in the back of the central panel in that triptych. Another representation in the 18th century is an icon showing the monastery and then the priests and the monks around it with the Mount Sinai and the chapel on top. And then finally, an illustrated book that shows you the way of life at the end of the 19th century. You have an idea of how they were living, and then you have the little hut up there where probably one of the monks lived. And this is the way they were bringing up people. You see, this is what they call the penthouse, and that they would just lift people all the way up there to enter the monastery. So it was well guarded, not easy to climb up these high walls. The monk of Sinai belonged to the Greek Orthodox Church and followed the traditions of the order of St. Basil the Great. And they formed the Orthodox Church of Mount Sinai, which is autonomous. Here is a noted view of the monastery with the basilica that dates back to the 6th century. You see pretty solid walls there. The little penthouse on the right and the belfry that dates back to the 19th century was demolished, and then they rebuilt it at that time. At the very back, you have the places where the monks live. And on the right there, you have the library and the place where the icons are, most of the icons are located. Another plan gives you, there are different chapels there. There is a little mosque that was built that is by now disaffected. But as it was under Arab ruling, they came with an agreement. They should have a mosque if there is a church, which to me is really fine. And then I just want to show you that behind the apse of the church is a little chapel that is the Burning Bush Chapel. We'll see it in a minute. So a view of the St. Catherine bell tower and a plan of the church itself. So very typical plan where you have the narthex, which is the transitional space between the outside and the sacred space. Then you have the nave with all the thrones, the bishop throne, and then different chapels. The narthex there, we'll see the beautiful mosaic. And then here behind you have the burning bush. And I wanted to mention this St. James, the number 10, is one little chapel that we'll see that has beautiful frescoes. Now, keep in mind, there is no electricity in that place. Yeah, there's definitely no way to have it. And so what you see during the day is just daylight. But what you have to imagine is at night, you only have candlelight and oil lamps. And this is when the icons come to life, because all these icons are made with gold. And when you have the reflection of these lights like candles and oil lamps, that's when they come to life, really. So you see all these lamps hanging there. The typical, so this is the nave, but then you have, as typically in the, definitely at that period, the iconostasis, which is that screen between the altar and the nave that prevents, in fact, the regular people to see what is happening really in the apse and gives the monks total intimacy, if you want. Here's another picture. And you can second guess here what is so on top of the altar is that beautiful, in the apse, that beautiful mosaic that we'll see in a minute. So, and here's finally the apse mosaic of the Transfiguration scene from St. Catherine Monastery in Sinai. Transfiguration, which was very much the first name that would have applied to the monastery and then was replaced by St. Catherine. And so there we see Christ in a mandola surrounded by Elijah and Moses, and then James the Great, Peter, and John the Apostle. It dates back to the 6th century. Then you have at the bottom a whole series of important emperors and so on. For those that are allowed to go beyond the iconostasis, is here a picture of the altar with sacred books and relics all around. Because we have a place where some relics are just exhibited just as in a museum, but you have icons everywhere in the monastery. And as I mentioned, it is really at night that you see the relics, because now suddenly halos that disappear in the daylight, once you have that kind of light, the halos shine and really come to life. Among the many chapels that are around the church is one particularly pretty, with the St. James Chapel, with the Virgin of the Burning Bush. And this is really interesting because in the medieval Catholic Church, the burning bush is seen as a parallel with the virgin birth of Jesus. The fact that the bush is burning but doesn't burn, and the baby is born of a virgin, which seems contradictory. And so this became that kind of a symbol for both of them. And so the depiction of the burning bush triptych like this shows the Virgin with the bush in front of her and her emerging from there, is to identify her with the same symbol as the burning bush that is also called unburned bush. And here is the burning bush that, by the way, was transplanted from the original place, not too far, but to make sure it was within and protected by the monastery. It is actually a very large bramble that is there and that has been growing there for a long time. Here is one of the icons that I just brought. He is showing Moses before the burning bush. It's a piece from the early 13th century. To refresh your memory or to make you aware of what happened. So in the narrative, you have the angel of the Lord is described as appearing in a flame of fire out of the midst of a bush. And God is subsequently described as calling out from it to Moses, who had been grazing Jethro's flocks there. When Moses starts to approach, God tells Moses to take off his sandals, first due to the place being a sacred space. First, due to the sorry. The voice from the bush, which later self-discloses as Yahweh, reveals himself as the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And thus Moses hides his face. Moses asks, when I come to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask me, what is his name? What shall I say to them? The voice of God from the bush revealed that he's Yahweh. According to the narrative, Yahweh instructs Moses to confront the Egyptians and Israelites and brief the prophet on what is to take place. Yahweh then performs various demonstrative miracles in order to bolster Moses' credibility. Among other things, his staff was transmuted into a snake. Moses hence was temporarily afflicted with snowy tzahat, which means disease, and water was transmuted into blood. In the text, Yahweh instructs Moses to take a staff in his hand to perform miracles with it, as if it is a staff given to him rather than his own. And so Moses is very reluctant to take on the role that he says he has no eloquence and somebody should be sent instead. And so in the text, Yahweh reacts by angrily rebuking Moses for presuming to lecture the one who made the mouth on who was qualified to speak and not to speak. Yet Yahweh concedes and allows Aaron to be sent to assist Moses, since Aaron is eloquent and already in his way to meet Moses. This is the first time in the Torah that Aaron is mentioned, and he's described as being Moses' mouthpiece. So it's from that on, then God directs him to go up the Sinai and get the tables, the 10 commandments. So he was given the 10 commandments from God written on stone tablets. However, since Moses remained a long time on the mountain, some of the people feared that he might be dead. So they made a statue of a golden calf and worshipped it as an idol of God, thus disobeying and angering God and Moses. Moses, out of anger, broke the tablets. You remember the movie? And broke the tablets, and later ordered the elimination of those who had worshipped the golden statue, which was melted down and fed to the idolaters. God again wrote the 10 commandments on a new set of tablets, and later at Mount Sinai, Moses and the elders entered into a covenant by which Israel would become the people of Yahweh, obeying his laws, and Yahweh would be their God, and so on and so on. So imagine how such a nexus it is for the Jews as well as for the Christian later on. So it's a very important place. And this is the little chapel next to the bush, decorated with Iznik tiles, which are coming from Turkey. And to enter that chapel, you have to remove your shoes because it's a sacred place. This is the most ancient shrine in the monastery. The bush was mentioned by Egeria, who came to Sinai in 383. And here's another special place in the monastery, the Well of Moses, where she supposedly have met her future wife, Zipporah. Just a view of the mosque next to the church. But then we're going to enter in the two major treasure trove in the monasteries, both the library, and then we'll see the icons later. The library was founded between 527 and 565. It contains the world's oldest continually operating library, possessing 3,300 manuscripts, including the Syriac Sinaiticus, the Codex Theodosianus, and until 1859, the Codex Sinaiticus, which unfortunately they took advantage of the monks that were not always realized what was happening, and then took it to Russia, and then Stalin sold it. We'll see it in a minute, to the British Museum. And so it's partly it's in different places, we'll see. But this is a picture of the library. And here's the Archimandrite, Christophoros, and the UNESCO representative in 1957. An Archimandrite is the equivalent of the abbé in the Western world. So he's the head of the monastery. Since 2011, the team of the Early Manuscripts Electronics Library, called EMEL, an American nonprofit organization, has been working to capture page by page the monastery's 160 palimpsest, and I'm going to talk to you about the palimpsest in a minute. But these are part of the old codices that you find there. But what is really interesting for the very early book is palimpsests. Very strange names. I bet you not too many of you know what a palimpsest is, but now you will. So it's a manuscript page, either from a scroll or a book, from which the text has been scraped and washed off in preparation to reuse in the form of another document. They were short of parchment. Parchment is a long and expensive process. And so when they had many manuscripts there that they considered uninteresting, they would just scrape it out and rewrite on top of it. But with the actual technology, and we'll see among them the multispectral imaging, they're able to go in the different layers on the parchment and refine what was written under. And to their surprise, they found some incredibly old manuscripts that were absolutely unique. And this is so parchment was made of lamb, calf, or kid skin, was expensive, not readily available. A page was often reused by the scribes. The most important, and you see a page on the right, the Syriac Sinaiticus or Codex Sinaiticus Syriacus, known also as the Sinaitic palimpsest of St. Catherine Monastery or Old Syriac Gospel, is a late 4th or early 5th century manuscript with 179 folios containing a nearly complete translation of the 4 canonical Gospels of the New Testament into Syriac, which have been overwritten by a vita, just a biography of female saints at the end of the 7th century. So the oldest copy of the Gospel in Syriac, one of 2 surviving manuscripts, the other being the Curetonian Gospels, that are conventionally dated to before the Peshitta, the standard Syriac translation. And the Syriac Gospels was something very important. Syria was a pivotal place too for Christianity. And so this was important. And you see, thanks to the multispectral imaging, what we can read from that page that had been written over. Here's just the machine with which you do that, with the help of cameras and lights and so on. So it captures image data with specific wavelengths ranges across the electromagnetic spectrum. The wavelengths may be separated by filters or detected with the use of instruments that are sensitive to particular wavelengths, including light from frequencies beyond the visible light range. The reflected radiation is recorded in a camera, and then you can extract this. And so they are doing that to that 160 palimpsests that they have in that place. And then what we said, they are digitizing most of the manuscript that they have there. They have, this is not one of the old ones, but it's to show you the kind of machine that they scan the manuscript with. Now we're coming to a pivotal figure, Labegott Friedrich Constantin von Tischendorf, that was born in 1815, died in 1874, not too early. In May 1844 and February 59, he visited the monastery for research and discovered the Codex Sinaiticus, dating from the 4th century. At the time, the oldest, almost completely preserved manuscript of the Bible. The finding from 1859 left the monastery for Imperial Russia in circumstances that have long been disputed. Some people pretend it was looted. Some people say, no, we have the document that proves that the Archimandrite gave us the permission to take it away. I'll let you judge and decide. But in 2003, Russian scholars discovered a donation act for the manuscript signed by the Council of Cairo-Metochion. The monastery received 9,000 rubles as a gift from Tsar Alexander II of Russia. The codex was sold by Stalin in 1933 to the British Museum and is now in the British Library, London, where it is on public display. Prior to September 1st, 2009, a previous unseen fragment of Codex Sinaiticus was discovered in the monastery's library, as well as among the new finds of 1975. On other visits in 1855 and 57, Constantine von Tischendorf also amassed their more valuable manuscript in Greek, Christian, Palestinian, Aramaic, Georgian, Syriac, and took them with him to St. Petersburg and Leipzig, where they are stored today. That unfortunately happened in many places. They took advantage of these. Here's another page of the Codex Sinaiticus. So it's split in 4 unequal portions. 347 leaves in the British Library, 12 leaves and 14 fragments in the St. Catherine's Monastery that they found later on, 43 leaves in the Leipzig University Library, and fragments of 3 leaves in the Russian National Library. And this is a drama when you think of the value of that book for all of us. Again, some views of the paper. They also, among the many treasures they have an interesting paper, which is the Ashtiname of Mohammed. And the Ashtiname was granting protection and other privileges to the followers of Jesus under the time of Mohammed. It's also known as the Covenant of Testament of Mohammed. It is a charter or writ granting protection and other privileges to Christians given to the monk of St. Catherine Monastery in the Sinai Peninsula. It is sealed with an imprint representing Mohammed's hand. You can see in the lower part. Ashtiname is a Persian phrase meaning letter of reconciliation. Sultan Selim I confirmed it and acquired it in 1517 during the Ottoman conquest of Egypt. He took the original document to Istanbul for safekeeping and provided a certified copy to the monastery, which is this one. So the original has actually disappeared because it used to be in the palace, probably in Topkapi in Istanbul, but nobody knows where it is. So this is a copy of the original, but it proved that Mohammed wanted the monastery to be safe. Another absolutely extraordinary codex. And when I talk about codex and manuscript, it's the same in effect. The codex is just the shape. It's not a scroll. It's a codex in the shape of a book. Okay. And we typically talk about codex when it's a very early manuscript. Then we, after that, talk about manuscript. Here is an image of the codex itself with the cover that dates back to the 16th century. Typically, they would replace the cover because it became, if you handle it too much. And there you see what is under the cover with old silk dating back to Byzantium. And here, to give you an idea of the size, it's held there by the Archimandrite. This one was saved from these guys like von Tischendorf because it remained in the office of the Archimandrite, and he always refused to sell it or even let it be seen by anybody over there. And there is some reason. This is an incredible manuscript, and I had a strange experience. I saw that, I thought, oh my gosh, it's beautiful. I'm going to go on internet and see if I can find some good reproduction, though it is in the book, and the reproductions are good. It doesn't exist for internet. And that's one of the first time it happens to me. It does not exist. There is another Codex Theodosianus, so that reports to Theodosius, the emperor, that was only a book of law. But the Sinai Codex Theodosianus, they literally tell you there is no such codex. And I was really surprised when I saw that. So I answered immediately, there is one, you better go and check. It is in the Sinai. The book is a gospel, and it's entirely written in gold. And with incredible care and beauty, you can see how the T is written. It's all these are just done with such a sophistication and beauty. It has 7 illuminations that are pretty much at the beginning. Christ, and you can see a completely gold background, and painted in a way that is not what we think Byzantine, because they were much more, we always, when we talk about Byzantine art, it's an art of idea. It represents idea. So it's not supposed to represent a perfect human being. But for a while in Constantinople, you had the existence of two styles. You had the old Greek and you had the emerging Byzantine style. And here you will see two different styles. Christ, Mary, and the four gospel writers are in that old Greek style, very real. If you look at the extraordinary face of Christ, that is very human, had expression. He's holding the gospel in the left arm, he's blessing with the right hand, and the garments are painted in imperial purple and blue lapis lazuli, the two most expensive pigment of the time. Mary, slightly different border. Each of the illumination has different borders. And then we suddenly go back to the Byzantine style, more abstracted, simplified, the very rigid monk that is dressed with monastic habit, the cassock, the analabos, the belt, and so on. Their hands are raised in awe as he experienced the grace of God. And nobody knows, by the way, anything about that saint. It's totally lost. And then you see the gospel writers, and look at the way they painted. They in contrapposto. That's Greek. You can see the knee coming out of the tunic. You can see the hips that are moved. That's the old Greek style. So for a while, you have these two styles that are coexisting over there. So St. Matthew on the left is shown as usual as an older man, face of an initiate into sacred mysteries. Look at the colors of his clothes, muted rose and gray blue. And then you have St. Mark, a young man. Look at the folds of his garment, absolutely gorgeous. So we thought that the old-fashioned way of painting was lost, but it wasn't. It's a deliberate choice. Think that at that time in Italy, they couldn't paint anything close to that. It's long before Cimabue. And Cimabue was very abstracted. So let's talk about the icons. Today, the monastery houses a collection of over 2,000 icons, dating from the 6th century to modern times. At first, the very old one we'll see are made of an encaustic technique. It was developed by the ancient Greeks, reached its highest level of technical mastery through the work of genre painter Posias in the 4th century BCE. Don't forget, we have lots of testimony that the Greeks had fabulous painters. And it's talk about it again and again. We have not one example of it left. They were all destroyed. The only way of painting that we see is on vases. But all the beautiful paintings that are related in the literature, the Greek literature, we have none that remains. And so for us to look at this painting that I just showed you, shows you what they were able to do. And it's extraordinary. So the idea of the encaustic painting, it originates from the ancient Greeks, enkaustikos, which means burning in. And the painting or hot wax painting is a form of painting that involves a heated wax medium to which you could add colored pigment. The molten mix is applied to a surface, usually prepared wood, though canvas and other materials are sometimes used. The oldest surviving encaustic painting are the Romano-Egyptian Fayum mummy, and you must have seen these cover of coffins with extremely realistic faces on top of it. And this is what you see, the beautiful young lady there on the right. It's one of these panel paintings that were on one of these coffins. It continued to be used in early Byzantine icons, but was effectively abandoned in the Western Church. And towards the end of the first millennium, we see the transition to tempera. So tempera painting involves mixing pigments with a water-soluble binder, traditionally egg yolk. It creates a fast-drying paint. And this is what the early Italian painters were using and then transitioned to oil painting. So I'm bringing you some images that how an icon is painted, because it's a real ritual. It's not you just put your canvas there and then you go and you think, I'm going to do this or what. This is a religious experience. And this is why it's so important. So I borrowed these images from the process David Gianotti, who has a site on internet. And you see, you start with a board, and the border is either carved in, leaving some frame around, or the frames are added on. But it's not a flat surface. It's slightly concave. So what is really important, the material we use for painted frescoes are those provided by God, returned through the work of our hands as our offerings to him. And that's a really beautiful thing to think about. They gesso the board, and then they copy the design that they have decided to do on it with the help of a piece of paper with colors there, and then they just follow the main lines. Then they engrave the main lines within the gesso. Because once they put the painting on it, they won't see anymore what is there, especially that these tempera is very opaque. So Byzantine icons are painted using a structured and somewhat ritualized protocol, using a series of symbolic steps. So they put that bowl under the gold. Where the gold is going to go, you put that clay there, and you wonder why. And that's something you can see in old icons. Sometimes you say, why is that red under the gold? In fact, it intensifies the gold. The clay symbolizes the earth from which Adam was created. Once it's dry, they burnish it. And this is a particular agate stone burnisher. And then they put the gold leaves. With the gold leaf, you breathe life into the clay as God breathes life into Adam. Applying gold leaves fires the clay bowl into luminous beauty, reflecting earthly and heavenly light. The halo images of the solar disk and earthly clay is raised to a likeness of heaven. So the gold leaf is very soft. I don't know if you've ever worked with gold leaf, but it's incredibly light. And it's very, very soft and touchy when it's first applied. It kind of goes like this because of electrical reaction. But then in an hour or two, the gold leaf stiffens. And then what you do is you can either hammer some motifs in it or leave it just gold. And then you apply some painting, but the tempera, you don't do it with little brush stroke at a time. It's kind of a general, you fill up the spaces with these colors, as they call petit lac, so little lake. So you just do this. And then you put highlights. And the highlights, typically you have 3 levels of highlights. Here is the first highlight. And that established the volumes and the bright areas. And then you put the, what they call that last level, that's assiste. It's used for third highlight with the shell gold. And, or sometimes gold leaf applied over glue. And then finally, you have to leave to let your the painting dry, and that can take 2 weeks. And then comes the last thing is you apply the olifas, which is a kind of oil, on the thing, and that's again very very much of an experience if you want. So with the hands, and you really applying olifa to an icon is a solemn moment, a symbolic anointing. And it's very physical because you feel that oil and you go on the surface. So just to give you an idea of this, and I would suggest that we take a little break before we go into the beautiful icons of the museum. So if somebody could put some light, you have coffee and water. And if you have any questions, please let me know. No questions? Too many information.
Have you made one of these yourself?
No.
Oh, she's done something.
I had no idea. I did it on film. Okay. And you know, she wants to get us there. No, it was. The week or something, I don't remember. He's gonna have a floor on. He's not from. Right. Indians class. Good. No, I had comments. Oh, really? Oh, that's just. I shouldn't say that.
Zooming in.
I know, they must, well. Also, very interesting. This area is time their interest in happening. Like the other people used to be there. How their interest is in life. Wondering where else that's
What is?
where did most of the was there? Oh, so that's. Did you get? And it gets worse because there's so many. You know, right thing slow. And everybody's looking. Yeah, where I mean, I just. Well, from. The right side of the road. Only one of. For your husband.
Okay, I think I'd like you to take your seats and we're going to proceed.
For the rest of
Hello.
Start again.
Okay, people, I'd like to take you, I would like you to take your seats, please. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. So, as I mentioned earlier, in the 8th and 9th century, the Byzantine Empire, and particularly Constantinople, faced the question whether religious images with human figures were appropriate, or were they, in effect, idols? That has been a long discussion, as you know, even during the Reformation, we reached the same point again. Akin to statues of gods in ancient Greece and Rome. The iconoclasts attempted to ban icons and even destroyed many. They actually, if you ever go to Istanbul, there is a church that used to have Saint Irene, had a beautiful mosaic on the apse, and now it's just a cross. A cross was admitted, but not the figures around it. By the time of the iconoclastic controversy, the Sinai Peninsula, where St. Catherine Monastery is located, was under Islamic control, enabling the monastery's icons to escape iconoclasm. Oh, the dog is back. And let me just get the dog out. Come on, baby.
No, it's not in, it's not, but I've seen him sitting in
Okay, thank you. So we will start with the early icons that date back from before the iconoclastic period, many of which are supposed to have belonged to Justinian and were given to the monasteries. And they are going to show you the kind of quality that existed at that time and differs from our idea of what Byzantine art is. And the first one is probably the most extraordinary, and it's Christ Pantocrator, otherwise known as the ruler of all. This is the oldest known surviving example of the icon of Christ Pantocrator. It was painted and encaustic on panel in the 6th century. The panel was, when it was found, was coarsely overpainted around the face, and when the overpainting was cleaned in 1962, the ancient image was revealed to be an incredibly high-quality icon, probably produced in Constantinople. The icon was originally taller and wider before its top and sides were cut, and that's something, unfortunately, that happens. Otherwise, it's in pretty good condition. In principle, no, sorry, in principle, in any Byzantine Catholic Orthodox iconic representation of Christ, Jesus' right hand is shown raised in attitude of blessing. This same hand gesture is used by the priest to bless others in the liturgy. And for this reason, saints who are clerics are depicted raising their right hand in the same way. In Greek Orthodox iconography and also in early Christian iconography, the gesture of the blessing hand also shapes the letter I, C, and X, C. So the he, the Greek he, and the, it's not kappa. But you can see how the way the letters, the fingers are crossed, shape these letters. So the hand that blessed reproduce with gestures the name of Christ, which is the name above every name. So you have Jesus Christus. I see Jesus Christus. So what is really interesting is no useful description of the physical appearance of Jesus is given in the New Testament, and the depiction of Jesus in pictorial form was controversial in the early church. As you know, in very early church, they don't show Jesus, you show a lamb. And it's only later that they come. So the depiction of him in art took several centuries to reach a conventional standardized form for his physical appearance, which has subsequently remained largely stable since that time. Most images of Jesus have in common traits which are now almost universally associated with Jesus, although some variants are seen. The conventional image of a fully bearded Jesus with long hair emerged around 300, but did not become established until the 6th century in Eastern Christianity and much later in the West. And then you see its head is surrounded by a cruciform halo that also identified him as a god. The icon of Christ Pantocrator is one of the most common religious images of Orthodox Christianity. Generally speaking, in medieval Eastern Roman church art and architecture, an iconic mosaic or fresco of Christ Pantocrator occupies the space in the central dome of the church. In most of these places, you go to Hagia Sophia, or you go to the beautiful churches in Palermo, for example, you have these huge images of a very stern and very powerful Christ. That's where he is normally shown that way. And in fact, a lot of scholars consider that the Pantocrator is a Christian adaptation of the image of Zeus, which makes sense because you had these very large statues of Zeus in the temples. And so that would be kind of a shift. And it's normal, you know, they just don't only impose an image, but it's an evolution. And this way they attract people from other religion to theirs. So in this place, Christ holds the New Testament in his left hand and makes the gesture of blessing. Now, what you see here especially if you're an artist, you're going to see that face is bizarre. It is asymmetrical. If you look well, you see that the right and the left are quite different. And in fact, what happens, they signify the divine side of Christ and the human side of Christ. And if you split the image in two and you make it a mirror image, this is the way he would look. So two natures of God. Isn't that incredible? And I'm going to bring you back to the previous image. So it's full, when you look at that, it's full of symbolism. They really identify that idea of having two natures. And just an idea, the kind of gesture and the meaning of them were quite known at that time. You had at the time of the orators, they were gestures that had lots of meaning, and people would respond to these meanings. And later on, you see that the illustration from the Chirologia, which shows again all the symbolism associated with signs of the hands. Another of these absolutely superb icons is the very large icon of St. Peter, also made in the 6th century, also with encaustic. And again, you can see how incredibly realistic they are. There's nothing of the abstraction of Byzantine, the Byzantine art. It's a large one for an icon. It's 36 inch by 21. So that's a large size. He's recognizable as an old man with short cut beard. So we know when is that it is St. Peter. The cross that he has on the right relates to the story that he will be crucified. And the keys, of course, it's Christ's bestowal of Peter on Peter of the keys to the kingdom of heaven. And he's set in front of a classical niche. And look at the little medallions that are above him. It's Christ, Mary, and probably St. John. It's a young apostle. Look at the detail of the face. It's so stunning. The highlight on the hair and everything, it's absolutely beautiful. Most of these old icons show a lot of wear at the base of the icons because of the fact that they were handled by the bottom and they were kissed. Typically, when people were praying in front of an icon, they would kiss it. And it's always at the base. So often you see some particular wear at the bottom of the icons. Unfortunately, not in as good a shape as the other two is here St. John the Baptist, the rugged, ascetic. He wears a garment of camel's hair. He was known as the last of the prophets, Elijah who is to come, model of the monk's life of self-denial, but was one of the most popular saints in Constantinople, where 35 churches were dedicated to him.
One place.
And then the pretty well-known enthroned Mother of God with angels and saints. Here we have the other representation of Mary, the very beginning where Mary is shown with a child. And that image, you always try to find a source of that image. And where you have children shown in Greek art or in Roman art, but the modern child is unique to Isis and Horus in Egypt. And this is definitely the source of the iconography that we see here. It's Isis and Horus on her laps. And this is substituted now by Mary and baby Jesus, to the point that in France, for example, we can't believe that religion just came, we Christianized and that's it. No, for a long time, you have different religions that are still intermingled with Christianity. And when you go to Chartres in France, for example, they found a lot of statuettes of Isis under the church because it used to be a temple dedicated to Isis. And for a long time, people, think of peasants or hunters. They like the habits. They like the guy that they were bringing them good hunting or good harvest. And so they would still use some deities that were prior to Christianity and were using at the same time of it. So definitely when we see Mary that way, we can really think of Isis and Horus. Now, the way she's represented there also is a beautiful throne with pearls and precious stones and so on. It seems bizarre for a humble woman coming from Nazareth. Whereas with Isis and Horus, there would be, luxury associated with it. another again, but here we transition to tempera. So this is one of the last, the one we saw before is the last one with encaustic, but now most of them that we're going to see are made of tempera, and shows Christ as the Ancient of Days. And it's from Christ that shows the Alpha to Omega. So it's from the beginning to the end of times. So, these two icons are believed to be a pair because they are exactly the same size. And so typically they would have been used, and because of their very large size, they probably were part of an iconostasis at the time, that big screen where you would have all kind of representation of saints and God and so on. And so we put them together there so that you can appreciate them at the time being on the same iconostasis. So on the left, you have Prophet Elijah fed by a raven. And that recounts that God talked to Elijah at Mount Horeb, which is the present Jebel Musa. Since the 4th century, Christian pilgrims have prayed at the chapel by the cave where Elijah is believed to have stayed. He is dressed anachronistically with an ancient Roman tunic, and he's got the arms raised in prayer. A hand, and if you look well at the top of the icon, you see a hand there above the raven that reaches from the sky in a gesture signifying speech. That means that God is speaking right now when you look at it. The raven refers to an early episode of his life having to do with nourishment received while in the desert. And then on the other side, you have Moses receiving the tablets with the 10 Commandments. I'm only showing you a choice, and it's not particularly the best of them, but again, constraint of time do it. The Menologion is in fact like a calendar month with all the saints that are celebrated that month. And so there are more than 30 of them, but it's supposed to represent, I assume there were more than 30 that were celebrated in a month. And so they show you all these saints. And here is blow up of some of them. So you can see they're quite differentiated with symbols and vestment and so on. So it's a collection, the Menologion is a collection of information arranged according to the days of a month, usually a set of such collection for all the months of the year. It is used for ancient Roman farmers' almanacs, for the untitled Old English poem on the Julian calendar that appears in the manuscript of the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, and so on. So it's something that was used in many different places. Here we have the mosaic icon of the Virgin Odegetria. This particular one that is made of glass and ceramics reversed on panel dates from the 12th century and shows an image of the Virgin that is very important in the Middle East and particularly in Constantinople at that time. You see that they engage, the two figures of Christ and the Virgin are engaged in a silent dialogue. She presents the prayers of the viewers while Christ is blessing as a sign of divine benevolence. Now, what is an odegetria? It is an iconographic depiction of the Theotokos, who is the Virgin Mary, Theos, God, Tokos, so the bearer of Jesus, holding the child Jesus at her side while pointing to him as the source of salvation for mankind. The virgin head is typically inclined towards the child, who raises his hand, and he is very royal in his, despite the fact he's supposed to be a child, but he's shown as a very mature child, if we can say. The most venerated icon of the Odegetria type, regarded as the original, was displayed in the monastery of the Panagia Odegetria in Constantinople, who was built especially for that icon. And that painting became known as the Madonna of Constantinople. It was said to have been brought back from the Holy Land by Eudocia, the wife of Emperor Theodosius, and to have been painted by Saint Luke. And I show you the image there of Saint Luke. Saint Luke was supposed to be the first that have painted the Virgin and so on. That's why all the guilds of painters were named Saint Luke. And all the academies are Saint Luke. It's because he's supposed to be the one that has the first painted, and as he was close to the Virgin Mary, he's supposed to have made her portrait. And so that first portrait of the Virgin is supposed to have been that icon that was brought to Constantinople and has since disappeared. But many were made using that as a model. And so you have a whole series of this type of Virgin that absolutely beautiful, where a particular gesture of the Christ figure and the Virgin. Other icons, still tempera, is Saint Catherine of Alexandria with scenes of her life. And unfortunately, it looks like the wood has split a couple of times. Beautiful grand daisies. The daisies in Byzantine art is a traditional iconic representation of Christ in majesty, enthroned, carrying a book and flanked by Mary on one side and John the Baptist on the other. And you find that these three representations in many places. Again, Hagia Sophia has one of the door with the grand daisies, and in many other places. It's a typical representation of these three very important figures. This one is believed to have been painted in Sinai. Then I think a really interesting one here is the Heavenly Ladder of St. John Climacus, dated late 12th century, tempera and gold. And it shows here it's based on the spiritual text of the same name, written by a monk called St. John of the Ladder, who lived there. And in his writing, John warns his fellow monks about temptation of the monastic life. In the icon, the ladder, the artist depicts these temptations as elegantly silhouetted demons who attempt to tug the monks of the ladder as they climb towards Christ. I think it's absolutely adorable. And then finally, Saint Theodosia, she was a saint whose cult was very popular in Sinai, as it was in the Byzantine world. She wears a somber dress of a nun, although her historical status is debated. To the Christian faithful, she represents the challenges faced during iconoclasm, when she reputedly died defending a famed icon of Christ, Pantocrator, in Constantinople. The cross she holds represents her martyrdom. She was also famous in the late Byzantine period for healing miracles attributed to her. So very different, very stern view of that woman. Now, to conclude, I'm giving you some news about the monastery, dated June 6th, so it's pretty recent. The future of St. Catherine's Monastery in Egypt's Sinai Peninsula remains a source of controversy, with tensions rising after a recent court ruling that transferred the site to state ownership while granting the church only usage rights. The decision was met with strong opposition from the monastery's monks, who have now closed its door to visitors in protest. Despite reassurance from Egyptian authorities, the ruling has alarmed the Orthodox Church, which described it as a dangerous precedent. The opposition has extended far beyond Egypt. It is still in process. So the Orthodox Church is really resisting what's happening, but Egyptian government is more powerful than that. So I hope you have enjoyed that discovery. I think it's an incredible place. It has incredible art and incredible treasures. Think of all these old manuscripts. So here's for the coming up, the next presentation, which will be in a week at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. That's the afternoon program at 4 o'clock. We're going to talk about a wonderful manuscript, the Morgan Beatus, a Spanish Apocalypse. That's, again, you probably have never heard of it, but do come, you won't believe your eyes. So it's extremely different to most manuscripts you've ever seen. Has been part of inspiration to Picasso because of its abstraction and incredible color scheme. So if you see me in black today, next week I'll be in bright yellow. But it's a superb manuscript that is talking about commentaries on the apocalypse. And so, of course, we have to think that in the 9th, 10th century, there was nothing to be read. Don't forget that all the Greek and Roman literature had been forbidden, so it was not there anymore. All you could read was books, Christian books. The Revelation was surely the most fun to read because it had all these incredible images. And for illustrators, it was an incredible source. So they really took advantage of it in that manuscript. So really do come, and we have 2 events at the same time. That friend of mine who was in the St. Catherine Monastery will talk briefly about it and bring you some of her icons to look at. And then at the end, we are going to do a celebration because this is the 11th year of programs here at the school. And so we want to celebrate that because I think we've all enjoyed, and me in particular, because by giving you these talks, I do the research that I love, that otherwise I couldn't do. Thank you so much. And by the way, the early October, we have the biography of Ivan Ivazovsky, who is an incredible painter that you probably never heard of either. We're reaching the end of things you haven't seen, but it's okay. And he's a romantic Russian, no, not Russian, sorry, Crimean painter that is specialized in marine paintings, but you've never seen water described the way he does. Just incredible. Has traveled a lot, so shows us views from Capri and from Istanbul and the Niagara Falls. So a very, very high level painter, quite interesting. And then October 14th, Perrin McEwen is going to show us the first episode of his 3 lectures on Jackson Pollock. Thank you. If you could put the lights on. Hello, I don't know if you have any question. You can unmute yourself and ask me if you want. I'm going to just stop the recording.